We're in this series, we're trying to take a look at the work that we do and does God care about it? Let's make sure that we're defining work correctly. Work is not that thing you get paid for. At least that's not all that work is. Work is whatever you do that makes yourself useful to someone else. So if you're the CEO, CFO, Chief Operating Officer of your household, you are working there. Whatever you do to make yourself useful to someone else, that is your work. And I'll be really honest, I don't think hardly any of us really have a theology of work. And so I'm going to push you this morning. All right, here's what I want you to do. You ready? Grab this real quick. It's a Connect card. It's in your thing, and that's the thing that Matt usually tells you to fill out, and you never do. Pull it out real quick. And grab a pen. I know there's pens right in the chair back right in front of you, and if you run out of them, everybody, if you're looking at me, you're doing it wrong. You got to take this out, okay? Pull it out. Here we go. Grab a pen. If there's a woman in your row that has a purse, there's about 12 pens in her purse. Ask her to borrow one. All right, here's what I want you to do. Take this, and on the Connect card, just write, "Hi, I am," and write your name. Don't look at me. You should be looking down. Come on, let's go. "Hi, I am." Ready? And write your name. And then I want you to write this. I am a... What's your title? If you don't have like an official title, make one up. It'll be cool. Be creative. What are you? I am a what? What do you do for work? What would they call you? I am a blank. Okay, those are the first two easy parts. Here's the third part, and it gets a little trickier. If you're a Christian, you should probably have a sense of this, but I'm going to tell you it's not an easy question, okay? Fill this out. Ready? I serve God by... hi, this is who I am, and this is what I do, and this is how I serve God at my workplace. How? How do you serve God at your workplace? To try and fill that out. And by the end of this morning, I'm hoping that you have at least somewhat of an answer to that. Here's why I bring that up. It's because we've been looking at this verse in Colossians 3:23. It says, "Do your best. Work from the heart for your real master, for God, confident that you'll get paid in full when you come into your inheritance. Keep in mind always that the ultimate master you're serving is Christ, which means the sullen servant who does shoddy work will be held responsible. Being a follower of Jesus doesn't cover up bad work." So if God is your boss, my question for you is this: how do you serve him then? How does someone who follows Christ and does your work, how do you actually serve God? When pastors preach this message, they usually say two things. The first is this: I serve God by evangelism. My coworkers, I share who Christ is with them. And sometimes they say, I behave in such a way so that they might ask, like, hey, what's the reason that you do that ethical work or that great work? And it just gives me an opportunity to share Christ with them. So some would say evangelism. Well, that's great and that's important. There's verses about that. Fantastic. The other kind of message that you'll hear is this: whatever you do, don't make work your idol. Right? Sounds really biblical, right? It just means don't let that come before God or family, right? And that's about where the messages stop. Can I just say that it's taken me a lot to try and dig into some books and some sermons where people are preaching more than just this. Can I give you some ideas about how you might serve God in the workplace? And by the way, when I go over these, you'll see the diagram. It's in your notes there. If any of those resonate with you, would you fill out that Connect card? Hi, I am, and this is what I do, and I serve God by, and you put it in your own words? Okay, here we go. How about this? Social justice. I know there's some people in our church, they work for the city, and they do things that help people in our city, particularly disadvantaged people. We have people who work for offices that deal with a lot of homeless people. They give voice to the voiceless, or they give influence to people who don't have a platform. What about this? I serve God by my excellence. I'm going to be the very best that God allowed me to do. So through excellence or my ethics, I'm going to do the very best I can. It kind of begs the question, well, why? What does that lead to? It might lead to great work. But for some of you, you're like, I do that so that people might ask me, why do you do that? It leads to an opportunity to share Christ. Let me give you a different one. artists will get this. Not everybody will. I serve God by creating beauty at my work. At our house, we had rats. They died. I don't mean we had pet rats. I mean we had wild rats. And they died. How do I know they died? They died into the walls of our house because I could smell them. Oh, it was nasty. We couldn't find them. We knew that they were like up under the bathtub in the crawls. How do you get that out? Like, you don't want to take out a bathtub. What do? I go into my daughter's room and I cut out the drywall in a 4-foot by 1-foot section. Took the carcasses out. Woo! Yeah, that's when like everyone looks at you like you're the dad. Yeah, but you're my slave children. So once the nasty work was done, then the work of beauty began. It became this father-daughter project as we screwed the drywall into the wall and then started taping and mudding. And at one point after mud, the next day it's dried, and then the real work begins, any of you who understand drywall work, and you start sanding. And so after about 30 minutes of sanding, Courtney asked me, "Dad, am I done?" Because I was supervising. She's like, "Dad, look, it's pretty good." I was like, "Pretty good? What do you mean, pretty good?" No. This is like a work of art, because in my mind, this wall it's a black painted wall that is painted with that black chalkboard paint, and she has stuff written on that wall. And in my mind, I'm imagining this thing of beauty that if you walked into that room, you would never be able to pick out where the patch job had been, because it is so smooth and perfect. I said, "Keep sanding, kid." We did, and when we were done, I dare any of you to walk in her room today and try to figure out where we patched that wall. Why? It's a thing of beauty. And you might think I'm making too much of this, but I literally saw it and thought, that's beautiful. You're a landscaper. You're somebody who creates. You're an artist. Beauty can be a great thing that God is a part of. What about changing culture? For some of you, you say, we're going to change culture. We're going to do things in such a way that's going to change policy in our city, or change culture in such a way that it's going to add value, ease, comfort, efficiency to people's lives. Wait, the Silicon Valley is like founded on this. We're going to do things in such a way that this digital age is going to make life easier and more efficient. For some of you, changing culture is a big one. For some of you, it's about changing attitudes. I'm going to go in and I'm going to glorify God. I'm going to serve God by my attitude. I'm going to have joy and optimism and gratefulness. And hopefully they'll bleed off on everybody else. For others of you, you say, I'm going to serve God because He gave me gifts, abilities, and resources, and I'm going to find the greatest fulfillment where my gifting meets the world's needs. So some of you feel really fulfilled because you're using your greatest gifts. That's why some of you feel really unfulfilled, because you feel like you're not using what God has given you. Other people say this, listen, I'm going to serve God by my generosity. They're going to say this, I'm going to make as much money as I can so I can give it away. There's a family like that in our church, and they actually take it a step further. They say, we're going to make as much as we can, and then we're going to do this. We're going to live as frugally as we can so we can be as generous as we can. I was like, who are those people? Like, that's amazing. I don't know a lot of people that live that way, but that's how they serve God. All right, so I kind of came to the end of our bubble illustration. Did any of those resonate with you as to why you work? Remember, work isn't the job. Work is just how you make yourself useful to others. It's not where you get your paycheck from always. I left some out, I'm sure. I know the list is probably longer. Maybe you do it for rewards, okay? God's rewards. Maybe you do it to have influence with people. I had one person answer this question. I think the thing I do to serve God at my work is I do it so I can just love on people. Well, Jesus said, love God, love people. And so maybe that's your deal. At any point this morning, did you write something on your card yet? I'm going to come back to this at the very end. Because I'm going to ask you, when the offering basket comes around, put that in the basket. Because I would love to read how you see your work. Because my workplace is different, right? You're looking at it. I work here. I don't get to work where you work. And so I want to know a little bit more about where you work and how you see. So here's what we're going to do. Which one of those answers in that diagram is actually correct? They're all correct. You could probably find a verse for every single one of those. Maybe some of those are higher priority than the others. Maybe some of them only apply to certain things. I talked about the beauty one. I had this guy who writes code for a company. He goes, I keep telling my employees this, I tell my team this every single week, like, code is beautiful. And they look at him like, you're looking at me right now. But he loves that. So here's what we're going to do. I share all of that with you to say this. The concept of work and where God is at in the workplace and how you should see work, it's super complicated and messy. I don't think it's really clear. But I'm going to give you 3 things today and tell you here's 3 things that work is. 2 of them are really optimistic and encouraging. One is it's encouraging, but it gives a little darker side to what work is. Here's the first one, and this is an optimistic one. It goes like this. Work is our vocation. You know what the word vocation means? It simply means calling. This is how the calling works. Hey, you, come here. I have something for you to do. Okay, your dad gave you a vocation all the time. Hey, you kid, come here. I got something for you to do. In this case, God is the one calling and saying, hey, I have something for you. Where do I get this from? Matthew 11:28. Jesus is talking to his followers. He says this, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Stop there for a minute. We read this and we come across the rest word and we're like, oh, yeah, rest. That sounds good. Because in this valley, how many of us workers, whether we're Christian or not Christian, are weary and burdened? We're just tired. Then we see that rest concept. We're like, oh, yeah. This verse is about rest. This verse is only partially about rest. You know what the majority of this verse talks about? It actually talks about work. Listen to where it goes. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. What's a yoke designed for? In the first century, it would have been this wooden thing that bound 2 animals together. It's something that fits over the shoulders of a beast so that he can pull a plow or a wagon behind him. And he says it's not designed to be painful, rough. It's not designed to hurt you or harm you. It's designed to fit you and be light and easy. So Jesus says, come here. I have something for you that fits you. It's what we call vocation. You know what's crazy is when the word vocation started coming out thousands of years ago, they started talking about this when Jesus came, and then all of a sudden people were called to the ministry. And you had to be a priest or a pastor to be called. I mean, if you were a blacksmith, that's just a job, right? Thank you to people like Martin Luther and John Calvin, who reestablished what the New Testament accurately talks about as to who is a priest. If you're a follower of Christ, you're a priest of Christ. You're anointed, you're called, and therefore you have a vocation. Just being a pastor, those aren't the only people who are called. Every single Christian, Jesus says to you, hey, come here. I got something that fits you, that is good for you, that will be right for you, that isn't designed to hurt and harm you. So our work is a calling, and it's recognizing 3 things. Jesus designed us for this work. He's with us in the work, and he rewards us for the work. There's a guy by the name of Don Flo. He's a Christian, and he's a Christian on the East Coast. He owns car dealerships. And in his car dealership research of the people who bought his cars, he found out that there were some people who paid less money for cars and some people who paid more money for cars. You know who the people were who paid less money for cars? White men. The people who paid more money for cars? Women and minorities in his town. As a follower of Jesus, he's just like, that doesn't seem right. Like, the people who are not negotiating as hard are paying more. Why? That just doesn't seem right. So you know what he did? He went to a flat rate, an affordable flat rate that no matter what your skin color, no matter what language you spoke, you could get a car at a fair, affordable rate from Don Flo. Why? Not because it was the best business decision for him, but because he was a follower of Christ and he felt Jesus saying, hey, come here. I have something for you in your workplace that I want you to do. So let me invite you to do something. This might be why you're here today. You ready? In your work, the thing that makes you useful to others. If Jesus says to you, come here, I have a yoke, a harness for you that fits your skills, your abilities, your passions, your heart, that is just made for you, why don't you ask him what it is? Now, my guess is this, you already have. You've asked him to say, hey, God, I'm about to graduate from college and I got a lot of debt. What's that thing you have for me? And it'd be great if it fit. I just need a big paycheck too, God, right? You prayed that prayer as well as I did. But in your current job, what if you asked him right now, hey, God, what do you have for me? How can I serve you best in my workplace? Now, I'd recommend being very, very careful here because he might answer you in a way that you don't want to hear. Because some of you, you're going to ask that question, and the answer that you want is, hey, quit that boss, and you could go work over here. It'll be way better. But his answer to you might be, you're exactly where I want you to be. For others of you, he might tell you, you know what? I've been telling you for 5 years, get out of that job. I got something better for you. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you're unwilling to move because, that just is comfortable, safe, you understand it, but you're unwilling to move. What if you honestly believe that you have a theology of work, that Jesus calls you to it, he's with you in the midst of it, he will care for you and reward you for it? What if you could trust him to ask the question, God, how do I do this work to serve you? How do I do this work to honor you? And God, is this actually the right work you want me to do now? Or maybe there's something else. What if you ask Jesus the question, and maybe that diagram comes up again, and as you look over it, he speaks a fresh word into your life about what you should be doing or a new way to do what you're doing, like dawn flow. Let me give you a second thing here about what work is. Work is not just a vocation, but here's the one that's a little bit more pessimistic. Work is fraught with idealism and cynicism. In week 1 of this series, we pointed out this. Genesis chapter 2, sin enters the world. God creates the world magnificently, where work is a gift to humanity. And then we mess it up and we're like, hey, God, we don't want you as a part of our work. And God says, okay, that's fine, but your work from here on out is going to be about thorns and thistles. It's just going to be hard. Listen, we still live to some degree with the consequences of the curse of living in hardship. 2 things come from that. Number 1 is this, idealism. Sometimes idealism pops up when we forget that we still live under the circumstances and the consequences of some of that curse. You know where idealism comes from? Really good graduation speeches. You've heard them, right? You can do it. Go out there and make a difference in the world. And someone gives a great graduation speech. And maybe like for 30 seconds they'll say, and by the way, it'll probably be challenging, but go change the world. Whether you're in high school or college or it's a kindergarten graduation, whatever. Wherever those came from. Kindergarten graduation. Okay. The point is that idealism is this thought that life should be fair, just, and kind to me. Idealism says, through my work, I'm going to change the world, make a difference, accomplish something new, bring justice to the world. And by the way, there's an age demographic for idealism. You know what it is? People in their early 20s. If you're in your early 20s, I get it. You're like, I'm not idealistic. Just because the rest of the world stinks and I think it should, be fair and just and right towards me. Like, here's how you know you're idealistic. When you're offended or horrified or shocked when someone doesn't treat you fair. When it's not just towards you. Or when there's a system that discriminates and you're like, oh, how could that be? I was interviewing somebody just a couple weeks ago. And they made this statement. They said, yeah, I was working for this church, but, they were more like a corporation than really the family of God because, they made decisions based off of money. Anytime that someone in ministry is like, oh, yeah, they make decisions based off of money. I'm like, so you want a paycheck from me, right? And you want me to make decisions that aren't based off to some degree on money? That's idealism. Oh, you don't think that money makes things happen? Yeah, it'd be awesome if we came to church and never talked about money ever, but the problem is that money is the reality of our hearts. It reveals the reality of our hearts. Idealism. If you are offended by the fact that the world doesn't treat you fair or doesn't treat you just, there's an idealism there. So here's my thought. I don't think you can actually have a theology of work if you don't have a theology of sin. Here's my theology of sin. It's super simple. Sin is in us and sin is among us. What I mean by that is sin is in you. You regularly, maybe even before you got here today, sinned. Did something that you're like, that wasn't right, that wasn't good. Thought it, said it, did it, I don't know. But it's also among us, which means this: you're going to get your work wrong. You're not going to make the decision with the wisdom that you needed to, or you're going to have the wisdom and you're going to choose not to do it the way that God has shown you to do it. You're going to mess up. You're going to hurt relationships. And guess what? There's a world out there that is going to do the same thing with you. The problem is when we experience it that too much, at that moment, idealism can lead to cynicism. Timothy Keller writes a book, and I think I left the notes in there. It's called Every Good Endeavor. And in this book, Every Good Endeavor, it's one of the best books about work and theology and how God cares about it. Here's what he writes. Just because you cannot realize your highest aspirations in work does not mean you've chosen wrongly or are not called to your profession, or that you should spend your life looking for the perfect career that is devoid of frustration. That would be a fruitless search for anyone. You should expect to be regularly frustrated in your work, even though you may be in exactly the right vocation. No one's excited. You're all looking at me like, all right. What he's saying is this, is you might be super frustrated at work, and God might be like, that's exactly where I want you to be. I'll just give you a little bit of this, talk about it a little bit more next week. Maybe God's actually more interested not in what you're producing, but what the work is producing in you. Your workplace is a place of formation. Here's what's interesting. There was a guy who actually did better work than all of us combined in the world, produced more work than any of us ever will. His name was Solomon. He's in the Old Testament. He wrote a lot of the Old Testament. It says that his contributions were the greatest contributions up until his time, and he wrote this book called Ecclesiastes. You know what phrase is in the book of Ecclesiastes more than any other? This: meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. From a guy who did better work and more work than any of us. Meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. Here's what he said. I hated all the things I had toiled for, worked for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. He goes on to describe this. He goes, everything I've worked so hard for, I don't get the rewards of it because I got to leave it here. Not only that, but I have to leave the work here for some idiot who comes behind me to screw it up. It's a loose translation of Solomon, but it's true. By the way, the key to understanding the book of Ecclesiastes is when he says everything under the sun is meaningless. Watch this. If this is earth, this is the sun. Okay, not size-wise proportionate, I get it. If this is the earth and this is the sun, he says everything under the sun is meaningless. What he's saying is everything in this world, absent of God, who is bigger than the sun, is meaningless. And I agree with him. Because if you're going to work in this world and think that this is all there is to this world, and you're going to find fulfillment in eternal satisfaction from your work, it's either idealistic or it comes out as cynicism. He goes on. Cynicism says this: nothing really changes. Don't get your hopes up. Do what it takes to make a living. Don't let yourself care too much. Get out of it whatever you can. I'm going to tell you this. I think some of you are here today and you're cynical. You know what cynicism is? It's what 20-year-olds accuse older people of. Oh, yeah, they call themselves realists. They're not. They're cynical. I work out with a group of people a couple days a week, and we're all, before the workout, we kind of stand around and talk about stuff, and one of the gals just said this, like, yeah, I'm done trying to change the world. I'm getting a paycheck. I'm even getting to work from home right now, and it is fantastic. I'm done trying to change the world, and I'm done with these millennial startups. She was cynical about the fact that she could make a difference in the world. And so, by the way, Solomon kind of got there too. He said this in Ecclesiastes 2:17, so I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me, and all of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Solomon begins to recognize that without God, There's just this either idealism that life should be better and work should be better than this, or it's cynicism that like it's all just meaningless and nothing really counts. I'm going to tell some of you, I think some of you might be at a cynical place, and you need to have your hope restored that the work that you're doing, God cares about. Not because of how you think, how important you think it is, or how important somebody thinks your work is, or the amount of paycheck attached to it. The value of your work has absolutely nothing to do with your work. The amount that you get paid for, but we devalue work in all kinds of crazy ways. Somehow we value things that are called white-collar jobs. And for some reason, we foolishly devalue a thing called blue-collar jobs. People who work with their hands and produce something, we go, oh yeah, that's because they couldn't. No. People with white-collar jobs, maybe they have that job because the only thing they can do with these are type. And they're not skilled with these. I'm just telling you, if you're getting cynical, the value of who you are before God and how you work, He cares deeply about. Here's why I tell you all this. I just think we have to have a theology of brokenness and sin as much as we have a theology of work. Work will be frustrating at times. It doesn't mean you're out of God's will. It doesn't mean He's not there with you. Let me give you a third thing as we're going to wind down here. Work is this. It's not just a vocation. Work is not just an opportunity for cynicism or optimism, but work is rewarded beyond our lifetime. When work is frustrating, you probably say one of three things. Here's the first one. What if I didn't accomplish what I wanted to? Have you ever you thought like when you took this job or you graduated from high school, graduated from college, and you're like, I'm going to do this, and you had a dream about what you'd accomplish, and it was more than a paycheck. I mean, there was something good. There was something contributing that you wanted to do, and you're like, no, I actually wasn't able to accomplish it. And you feel unfulfilled about it. I want you to listen to this. You are a part of a much bigger plan orchestrated by God that you are not privy to see. Do you know the name Antonio Salieri? Maybe? No, you don't? Some of you will. Some of you musicians might recognize his name. He was a composer of opera in the 18th century. He had amazing financial success because of his music. But he was super frustrated. There's a playwright about their lives by Peter Schaeffer called Amadeus. You may have seen it. Salieri was the one who, they're not sure in history how accurate the portrayal is, but Mozart was one of his gifted proteges, students. And Mozart was so much better than Salieri was. And Salieri was just jealous of him. I wish I could produce like that. Although Salieri was the business person who had great wealth because of the music that he produced. But in his lane, in the lane that God had given him, he looked at Mozart and was like, I wish I could. And Mozart, I mean, I don't need to explain what an amazing composer he was, died by the age of 35. And the contributions that he made to the music world. Yet he never even came close to a fraction of the financial success of Salieri. You know what makes us say, you know what, I just didn't really get to contribute the thing I wanted? Is when we're in our lane and we're comparing ourselves to the people in the lane next to us. Oh, I had a dream about what I wanted to contribute, and it was based off of what my parents said, what a teacher told me, or it was because I compared myself to those around us. Listen, are any of you frustrated? That you haven't been able to do the thing that God asked you to do. There's actually a story in Scripture, I'm not going to have much time to describe it, but there's a church who was in an argument. Shocker, it happens. There's a church that was fighting, and they're like, hey, there's this leader over here named Apollos, and he's kind of a good guy, and all these guys follow him, and but this section over, they're followers of Paul, and these guys are followers of Apollos, and there's this big division in the church, and Paul writes him a letter, and he says this. He says, I planted the seed. Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, But only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they will each be rewarded according to their labor. For we are God's co-workers in God's service. You are God's field, God's building. Here's why I read that to you. God was working in the world before you ever got here. And when you leave this world, God will continue to work in a way that you are not privy to see and that you will understand. You're not privy to know God's end game. I don't even think we're privy to know his current game. You don't know what he's growing in people. You don't know what your work is actually producing in the long run. We are co-workers in God's service. And it is God's field and God's building and God's work. Do you believe that? That whatever you put your hand to do this week, it's actually God's work. It's not yours, at least not yours alone. You're a co-worker with God. He's not only called you to it, he's in the midst of it. He shaped that yoke for you. And he's walking alongside you in this thing. A second question for you. What if my contribution was marked by failure? And I don't mean like, hey, I designed this thing and the product failed. I'll bet you somewhere inside of us, we all want to be remembered for something, don't we? What if there's been a place in your life that you're worried and concerned right now that you're going to be remembered more for your failure than any of the things that you contributed? I mean, moral failure, family failure, relationship failure. It didn't turn out like we thought. Can I tell you this? The gospel, which simply means the good news that is found in Jesus Christ. Listen, your contribution in the world, the gospel speaks directly to. Tim Keller in his book writes this, but the gospel frees us from the relentless pressure of having to prove ourselves and secure our identity through work. For we are already proven and secure. All work now becomes a way to love God who saved us freely, and by extension, a way to love our neighbor. Listen, if the work you're trying to do is trying to affirm who you are, or you're trying to create an identity in it, it's the wrong purpose for serving. There's too much pressure on that. We work because God loves us. We work because it creates meaning for us, but it is not to earn God's approval or your parents' approval or your spouse's approval or your kids' approval. What if my contributions are marked by failure? Then you take those failures to the cross and you say, Jesus, here's the gospel. My failures are here. You died for them. I'm going to release them to you. You give him your failures, he gives you forgiveness, and he adopts you into his family. You're a child of the King, regardless of the work that you do. And from that moment on, we work because we're saved, not to be saved. Are you with me? The gospel speaks into the workplace. Let me give you one last thought here. It's a third question. What if the reward and recognition for my success never really materialized? Some of us work for recognition, don't we? Because it feels good. I'd like one of our employees to stand up right here in the fifth row. Would you please stand and let's all applaud them? Let me tell you what they did. And some of you might be like, oh, I don't like the social recognition. But somewhere deep inside, you're like, I want to get credit. I want to be recognized. And there's something about your work that you want people to stand up and see. Your promised reward is still to come. Hang on to that. Someone steals your idea and they get the credit for it. Listen. You can fight for it if you want. You can fight for the recognition. You can fight for, you know what, that was my idea. But can I just say this? Every time in scriptures that I read about God caring about the workplace, it states something like this, Ephesians 6:7. Serve wholeheartedly. That means not with cynicism. That means wholeheartedly. Be all in. If you're going to serve the Lord, not people. As if you were serving the Lord, not people. Because you know, here it is, that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do. And some people take that and go, oh, see, if you do the right work right now, immediately it's going to turn around to a reward. Nope. Colossians 3:23 says this, do your best work from the heart, from the real master, for your real master, for God, confident that you'll get paid in full when you come into your inheritance. I don't think that gift is always in the here and the now. Last quick story. There's a guy that's gone to this church for a lot of years, and he's missing. Bob Menina passed away about 3 weeks ago. And you might be like, Bob Menina, I don't know that guy. He used to sit at the center camera right back here. Big old beard, and he'd sit there. I know my face looks mean, but behind that gruff beard was just the heart of a teddy bear. He's the softest, nicest guy, but quiet. One of the qualities of Bob that I think was great is he never sought the recognition for being a faithful person who served God. And tomorrow at 3 o'clock here, we're going to do a service right over here in the chapel. We're going to kind of remember Bob's life. And he's an example of somebody that worked, contributed, served, and didn't seek the recognition, left that in God's lap. So listen, let me wrap this up. I don't know why you're here. I don't know what God wants to say to you. He might be saying to you, hey, come here. I have something for you. It's a yoke that fits you. And if you trust me that I'm with you and I'm calling you to something, then would you do this? Ask me about the work you're doing. I will not only tell you what you should be doing, but I'll help you figure out how to do it. Maybe for some of you, you're so cynical, or your idealism is getting crushed, and you just need to know today that, you know what, it's okay to be frustrated with work. It's part of our condition. Or for some of you, if the recognition, the reward, the significance hasn't come with your work, stay with it. Don't fall into the trap of comparison. I don't know what God has for you. Very last thing, I told you that Connect card, remember? I serve God by. If you haven't written something down, do you now have something to write down? If not, you got to keep searching and keep looking. It's not a question I think we answer and then put it away. But can I invite you, would you write something down on there if you know? If maybe today helped clarify it for you? And would you turn that in when the offering comes around today? Let's pray. God, thanks for these folks who have been very patiently listening to me ramble about who you are and how much you care about our work. And God, I confess there's moments where I feel the pain of unfruitful work, what feels like it. But God, we know this. We don't know all the good you're doing behind the work that we sweat over all the time. God, give us eyes to either see the fruitfulness of it, or God, a heart that will trust you with the outcomes. I pray that we would dig in and not give up, that we'd be passionate about doing great, quality, heartfelt, loving, kind, excellent work in your name, Jesus. And I also pray that people would take notice and to be part of them coming to know you in this valley. God, there's a lot of people here who don't yet know you in the Silicon Valley, and I pray that they would because of our involvement in the workplace. And if you agree with that, would you say amen?